In June 1920, a heavy freight wagon was found tipped over a grade on the San Diego Dugway in the mountains of Mexico. Next to it lay the body of 70-year-old Alma Platte Spilsbury, baking in the summer sun for 36 hours before being discovered. Spilsbury spent years telling his children he had no use for fancy funerals or pomp and show. He preferred a simple end, to be dropped in a hole with a decent covering and a little dirt kicked over him. He frequently prayed that he would be allowed to die in the harness. It was his way of asking to remain useful and active in his labor until the very moment his life ended. This violent death on a mountain roadside was the realization of that wish. It concluded a life that began in motion and never found a reason to stop. Alma was born in August 1850 on the Nebraska plains. His mother went into labor as the emigration company pushed through intense heat. According to family history, his birth didn't even halt the wagon train. At 8 days old, the family's thirsty oxen made a dash for the Platte River, tipping the wagon from a high bank. Alma was thrown into the water, while his mother struggled to survive the current. He was rescued after floating downstream on a featherbed. Bishop Hunter drew the infant from the water by his heels, cleared his lungs, and added Platte to his name to commemorate the ducking. This incident marked the beginning of a life defined by the necessity of survival. As an adult, he was called to settle the southern part of Utah, known as Dixie. He and his wife, Sarah Ann, worked to make a home in the desert, raising a family where doctors were scarce and resources were thin. The environment took a heavy toll. After Sarah Ann died at age 29, Alma's 2-year-old son Johnny contracted diphtheria. Alma received the news while trading in a distant town and rode fresh horses day and night to reach the child. He arrived just before Johnny passed away. The toddler died with his arms around his father's neck, his hands clasped so tight they had to be pried apart. Despite this loss, the logistics of the frontier offered no room for a collapse. Alma had to immediately find a way to provide for his remaining children, eventually remarrying and continuing his work. In Arizona, Alma refused to use underground tactics to hide from U.S. Marshals investigating his plural marriages. He believed in facing the music and remained in the open despite the risk arrest. He was tried in Phoenix in 1887. He chose to plead guilty, believing it was a more honest offense than a denial, which resulted in a 6-month sentence at the Yuma Territorial Prison during the height of the summer. He spent his sentence working in the prison yards and gardens. Surviving the Yuma heat confirmed his physical stamina, but upon his release, he faced a choice between his property and his family. He was given the chance to either abandon part of his family or leave the United States. He chose to leave his developed land in Mesa behind. Alma moved his household into the Sierra Madre Mountains of Mexico. Making a living here meant farming fertile but remote land and hauling lumber through rugged terrain to provide for his 28 children. Worldly possessions counted for little when weighed against the integrity of his family. He viewed it as a duty to keep moving forward, regardless of how difficult the new territory proved to be. In his later years, Alma developed a deep fear of losing his vigor. He dreaded the idea of being set aside by a younger generation or losing the physical strength that defined his identity. He channeled this energy into organizing annual Old Folks' Days to celebrate the elderly, but he bristled if the label was applied to him. He famously told a young man that until he could outwork Alma in a ditch, he had no right to call him old. He maintained his status by becoming a highly respected driver of wool teams. He kept his animals grained and their collars oiled and fitted, demanding the same level of work from them that he demanded from himself. This constant physical labor was a defense against the end of his usefulness. To Alma, stopping meant giving in to the twilight of life, something he intended to avoid. On that mountain pass in 1920, the work finally came to an end. Alma was 70, hauling a load of wool when his wagon tipped. 2 days in the sun had left his remains in a state that made a standard funeral impossible. He was discovered only after the heat had already begun to claim the site. His family and neighbors had to use carbolic acid to mask the scent while they prepared him for burial. They washed him, placed him in a simple coffin, and buried him at the graveside. Alma Platte Spilsbury's life was an exercise in unyielding endurance. He stayed in the harness until his time was up, fulfilling his own prayer to keep pulling the load until the very end.